A better life, better vision, what you wanting? Let's make it happen. Time to choose the better story. Come on. Choose the better story. Hey, choose the better story. Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Choose the Better Story podcast. My name is Ryan and I'm the host. This is a podcast about vision, mindset, performance, and purpose. And today we're going to be talking about the wonderful, beautiful word failure and how failure is the best teacher on planet Earth. Now, before we go any further, I just wanted to remind you that I am not charging to do this. This is just free. Hopefully you're going to get lots of value out of this, as well as the episodes that will be coming. So please do your part and like and subscribe. It's possible that either you or someone that you know really wrestles with this word failure. And sometimes we can be our own worst enemies when we've made mistakes and we just don't let ourselves off the hook. And so if you know somebody that this could be a benefit for, please share the show with them so it can provide value to them as well. Today, as we talk about the word failure, I want to tie it directly to success and how most people get to success by one failure at a time. In fact, Thomas Watson, who's the founder of IBM, said it this way: the formula of success is quite simple. Double your rate of failure. Pretty interesting. We live in a time and in a world where when we think of failure, we don't think of it in relation to success. But that's actually how most successful people got to the place of success, was failing one time after the next. And if you've ever seen people get successful really quickly, they probably failed a lot really quickly as well. It kind of goes hand in hand. But in our world, we tend to view failure as something that we want to avoid at all costs. We want to avoid it like the plague. And so as we start our time together, I'm just going to ask you to entertain this question. What is your relationship with failure? Some of us might have grown up with the mentality that failure is not an option. Well, just a little reality check. Failure has to be an option because it is a part of life. And if your mentality is failure is not an option, you're going to be really disappointed when in fact you do fail along the way. Let's just talk about a couple people I'm sure you're familiar with who have actually climbed their way or clawed their way to success. The first one I can think of is an athlete, Babe Ruth, who actually set a home run record in his day. But at the same time, he was also the league leader in strikeouts. Another famous athlete, Michael Jordan, who I would say is the GOAT of basketball. I think I've made that clear before. I'm going to make it clear again. Michael Jordan, the GOAT of basketball. Did you know that when he was a sophomore in high school, he did not make the team? How would you like to be that coach? How would you like to be that coach that actually cut the future GOAT of basketball from the team? That has got to be something to be hard to live down. But yeah, that's part of Michael Jordan's story. He failed at making the team on his sophomore year. Pretty crazy. How about Abraham Lincoln? And Abraham Lincoln, he had more failures when it came to public elections than I think anyone else in history. And yet he stuck with it and eventually became president of the United States. How about Thomas Edison? Thomas Edison, he was known for making mistake after mistake after mistake. And had he given up on his mistakes, had he called it quits, who knows? We might still be living by candlelight today. But because he was willing to fail and fail and fail and learn from all those failures and eventually see success, we now have more than just one invention, but one of them is the light bulb that I'm sure we all benefit from in a practical way every single day. Thomas Edison famously said, "I have not failed. I have just learned 10,000 ways that don't work." So today we're just going to talk about 2 elite lessons that failure teaches us. And the first lesson is this: personal responsibility, or I would say ownership. I'm going to tell you a story about when I was in college. I had a class called World Civilization, and that class absolutely kicked my butt. The teacher's name was Mr. Claspel, and if I could describe Mr. Claspel very quickly, he would be the type of person that would be on the show Jeopardy, and he would win every night. I mean, this guy was like a walking encyclopedia. He knew of everything about everything. And I was so enamored by his ability to lead our class, to teach our class with no notes. It was like all up here. It was like locked in his brain. And he was just telling a story of how our world has unfolded. Incredible. So the downside of his class was his grading system. And he gave 10% for attendance and 40% for quizzes and 50% for exams. And if I haven't said it yet on the podcast in the past, I am a terrible, and when I mean terrible, I mean an absolute nightmare test taker. And the fact that world civilization was a class that was 90% of my grade was just tests. I mean, a lot of the other classes, I would be able to BS my way through stuff just by being able to submit assignments or submitting homework. But now that I was confronted with a test-only heavy class, I was in trouble. And I can just recall the first time I took an exam in Mr. Classible's class, it was in the 40%. It was 40-something percent. And I was devastated. I mean, coming out of high school, I was used to getting A's and B's. That was just the norm. A couple times I was able to get the 4.0 mark. But that was kind of my expectation coming into college. And when I took World Civ and my first test was in the 40-something percent, I mean, it was a big fat F flunk. I was scared, especially since the rest of the class was pretty much going to be graded on just quizzes and tests. I knew I was in trouble. And so I went to work to try to overcome this. And what I did is I would create note cards. This is back in the days where I didn't go to college with a computer. I went through college on a word processor. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. But that's how ancient I am. I went through college on a word processor. And so what I would do for the class to study is I would just write note cards. I would write a piece of history, a fact of history, and then on the back side, like an answer to that. So if it was a person, I would say what this person did. And if it was a place, I would talk about its relevance. And I would just make note card after note card after note card. And I'm not kidding. There was times that I had note cards that was like 3 inches thick. That's how many note cards I had handwritten out. And I would spend hours and hours and hours going over these note cards. As it came to test time, I knew this 3-inch stack of note cards. I knew every single one of them. I knew the answers. I knew their placement. And here's the problem. I took the next test and I bombed that. And so now I was getting really frustrated. I automatically went to excuses and blame. This is unfair. The teacher's giving us unfair tests. And it was easy at the time to shift the blame or to make excuses. Hey, I studied. I did my part. And I truly did. I would spend hours and hours and hours studying. I spent so many hours studying, the guys on my basketball team would actually make fun of me because they didn't study nearly as long and then they would do better on the test as me. It was really frustrating, but that was just my reality. And it was really, really painful. I went through the first semester of World Civ and I skated by. And when I mean skated, I mean I skated by with a C-. And when it came to the second semester, I knew I was in really deep trouble if something didn't change. And what I want to say about failure here is failure offers us a gift, and that gift is to take ownership and take responsibility. Every single one of our failures, it offers us a potential gift of taking ownership and responsibility. In the moment, blaming actually feels good. It feels like you're letting yourself off the hook. But long term, that is not a good outcome if you continue to blame things or blame people for what's going wrong in your life. Same thing with excuses. Excuses feel really good at the time, and it provides a really good short-term benefit to you, but long-term, if you live a life full of excuses, that is not the better story. In fact, if that becomes your habit of blaming and making excuses, that's actually a terrible way to go through life because then you're never responsible for anything. In fact, I would say one of the most dangerous things that you can say when it comes to failure is, that wasn't my fault. And typically the people that tend to blame others and don't take ownership, they tend to find themselves in a rut of making the same failures and then making the same excuses and then blaming the same people and pointing the fingers in the same direction instead of actually looking inside to see that there's a problem there within that needs to be solved in order for them to progress. It's kind of like putting different shades of lipstick on a pig and expecting the pig to look better. It's still the same pig. It's just a different shade color lipstick on the pig, but it's still a pig. And that's typically what people that will refuse to take ownership are doing, is they're just putting lipstick on a problem, a lipstick on a pig, instead of taking ownership. If failure is a good teacher, then we have to learn. And one of the best things we can learn is, well, what part did I have to play in that failure? What part do I have to own? And so when it comes to the World Civ class that I was struggling with, I had to confront the reality that what I was doing to study for the class was not working. And again, by the time we got to the second semester, people knew how much I was studying and how much I was failing. It was people knew I had a problem. And it wasn't until the second semester when I decided, okay, this isn't working. Me making, hundreds of cards and writing them out and memorizing them isn't working. So what can I actually do that would work? And you know what I decided to do? I decided to ask somebody that was getting an A+ in the class if I could study with them. And that was the game changer for me. I put away my pride. I admitted the fact that what I was doing wasn't working. I took ownership of that. And then I thought, well, what could I do differently that might yield better results? And that's what I decided to do. And you want to know how this guy in class who was getting an A+, do you want to know how he studied? He would literally just go over the pages of notes he took in class, and he would just kind of try to memorize them page by page. And that was completely different than the way I was studying. The way I was studying is I was just pulling different facts from all over and I would shuffle the cards, put them together, and I would know all these facts, but I didn't know how they chronologically lined up with actual history. I know it sounds crazy now that I explain it, but when we actually started studying page by page how Mr. Classwell had talked about how history unfolded, it started to compute in my brain that history actually starts in one era and moves to a next chronologically. It's not all these facts that are just random in history. They're facts that unfold according to chronological history. And as I started to study that way, it was like when I got to that test after I had studied with the guy that was getting an A+, I got a B+ on a test. And that was the best test score that I had received in World Civ by a long shot. In fact, Mr. Classwell asked me what I was doing different to study. And I told him, he's like, that's the most brilliant thing you could have done, is actually pair up with somebody else that is acing the class. And I actually, again, I'm a terrible test taker. So getting a B+ I was really happy with, but there was one other test that semester that I actually pulled an A-, and I thought I was on the top of the world. How did this happen? It happened because I took full ownership that the way I was studying was incorrect. It wasn't helping me. And then what I did is I came up with a solution that would potentially put me in a better spot. That is exactly why failure is an elite teacher if you are willing to learn the lessons along the way. Fortunately, I was willing to lay down my pride and change the way that I studied, and it actually significantly impacted the amount of success I was able to have in the class. Ownership is agency, and agency is the doorway to change. Hey, listen, every day you're writing a story, one that you settle for or one that you actually want. Most people choose the easy route, the comfortable story, but we all have a built-in desire to live a meaningful life and a better story. One with purpose, direction, adventure, and momentum. I help people get really clear about what they want in life, shatter their limiting beliefs, and go after the thrilling future that they've always wanted. Check out the link in the show notes, and you're going to get a link to a free ebook that gives you 2 practical ways that you can start rewriting a better future for your life, as well as an opportunity to schedule a free vision call with yours truly. Now, back to the show. The second elite lesson that we can glean from failure is identity separation. So I think I've mentioned in the past that I spent 21 years in ministry up in Paradise. And when I first got into ministry, I was just a knucklehead that had just gotten out of college. And I had no intention of ever being in full-time ministry. That was not what I had in mind. How it played out was during the last semester when I was a senior in college. I had spent the previous 2 summers being an intern for the youth group for a church up in Paradise. And I got a call from that pastor, and he said, "Hey, Ryan, we're opening up a middle school only department here at the church, and we want you to consider coming in and being the youth pastor for our church. And we really don't have any other people in mind right now other than you. Would you consider doing this?" Totally came out of left field. And I was not expecting that. My goal was to go to college and then become a teacher. And so this required like a big U-turn in my life. And my wife and I just decided, you know what? Let's do it. And so June 1st, 1998 was my first day that I started at the church there in Paradise. And I'm telling you, I came in wide-eyed and feeling very inadequate to do the job. Well, I didn't know this, but you had to jump through some hoops to become an official pastor. And I didn't know that until I was like a year and a half, 2 years into ministry. And then someone said, "Hey, how come you haven't become licensed yet?" And I was like, "Licensed? I'd never heard anything about that." What my understanding was, people said, "Oh yeah, what you're going to do is people just kind of want to hear your story. They want to just make sure you've got a basic understanding of the Bible, and you'd be able to handle and field questions from middle school students." And so there's like, it was super casual. And, it's just going to be people that are like your advocates. They work with the district, and you're just going to sit around like on a couch, tell them a little bit about your life, tell them about God's calling on your life and why you're passionate about serving youth. And so with that in mind, I just casually went down to a meeting at our district office. And I was expecting to sit down on the couch, and I was expecting them to be sipping on coffee while I unpacked my story a little bit. And that is not at all how things unfolded. What happened was I entered a room. I think there was like 10 or 12 people sitting around a conference table, and there was no couch, and there was no comfort. There was no relax. I mean, these people looked at me with daggers. And my initial thought was, I am in trouble. This is not good. And instantly filled with anxiety, filled with worried, feeling inadequate. All these people were leaders in the denomination who are well-versed, who are well-studied, who know what the heck they're talking about. And here's me, the guy that just graduated college and just wanted to be a teacher and somehow found his way into being a youth pastor. And they started to grill me with questions that was nothing at all like what I had been told this would be about. They didn't even ask me my story. They were just drilling me with questions. And I think what had happened is they had just got done trying to ordain somebody. The meeting right before mine was they were there to be ordained, which is like the next step after being licensed. And I think that committee assumed that I was there to be ordained as well. And I was not. I was there just as an entry-level person, just wanting to tell people my story and why I'm like working at the church, which is what I was told I was going to be able to do. By the end of our time together, I had failed so miserably that one of the people that was around that table, they basically said they didn't think that I belonged in ministry. And that was a dagger. That was probably one of the lowest moments I've had in my life, where I felt completely inadequate, completely like a failure. Like they were asking me basic stuff that I knew the answer to, but because the setting was so intense and because my mind was so scrambled, like this was not at all the setting that they had described to me it would be, my brain went on shut off mode. And I've never had that happen in my life before. And so it was humiliating, one, and two, like not even to be able to like give the basic answers to basic questions. I mean, they could have asked me how I spell my name. I probably would have got it wrong. It was that bad. And I just left that meeting feeling completely humiliated. I think this was my third or fourth year into ministry. And again, I started not knowing much about it and had never felt adequate within the church working there. I had never felt, and it just validated all of my feelings that you're right. Yeah, I'm not made for this. I'm not adequate. I shouldn't be doing this. And that was a really, really tough time for me because my identity had become, I'm a youth guy. I'm sold out. I'm dedicated to the youth of my town. I'm dedicated to growing, middle school students and helping develop them and being a meaningful part of their life and helping impact them in positive ways. That had slowly become my identity. And not that that's a bad thing. I think it was a good thing. Like, I was proud of what I was doing. But when I failed in front of my district leadership, it was as if I was a failure. And that's the second lesson that we can learn from failure is we have to learn identity separation. When it comes to our failures, we cannot attach that to our identity. We cannot say, because we've messed up, we are a mess up. We cannot have the mindset that because we failed, we are a failure. And there's so many people that walk through this life that have made failures, and now they're fully convinced that they are a failure. Their failure from 10 years ago still holds them captive today. And that's just not the way to live a better story. It's possible that someone listening to this podcast right now, you're literally listening to my voice say this about failure. You can recall something that you've done in your life and you still beat yourself up about it every day. You still convince yourself that you are a failure. Not that you made a mistake, but you are a mistake. And there's a huge lesson to be learned there. And one of the things that I struggled with after that time in front of that committee where I absolutely bombed in front of them, I went home with a mindset that I am a failure, that I don't deserve to be in ministry because I failed so miserably, that I don't deserve to be in ministry because somebody that had never met me across the table said they didn't think I should be in ministry. And so I just believed that. I don't think they intended it to sound like, Ryan, you are a failure, but that's exactly how I took it. And it was like a real shot to my pride. It was a real shot to my calling. And it was a definite shot to my identity. And when identity is tied to outcomes, then failure feels like a verdict. You are a failure. And if you don't separate failure from your identity, then failure becomes shame, it becomes avoidance, and it becomes playing small in life. But if you can separate failure from your identity, then failure becomes data, it becomes feedback, and it becomes fuel for you to take on your future. Fortunately for my story, after I failed miserably in front of that committee, I put that all behind me and I just went to work. My sole job at that point was I was going to prove this committee wrong, and I was going to prove that I did belong, because I already knew I had passion to serve youth. I already knew that. You couldn't take that away from me. A committee couldn't take that away from me. And so what I did is I went to work to prove that I did have what it takes. I went to work to prove my worth. And so I did the studying. I did the papers that they wanted me to write. I took the courses that they recommended that I took. And I went back and not only got licensed, but I got ordained as well. And I'm just proud of the work I put in, because I could have quit. I could have folded. I could have just avoided that mess altogether. Instead, I leaned into it. I learned from it. I didn't like the fact that it ever happened. But now that I'm looking at it from the angle on my side here, I'm super grateful for that. Even though it was humiliating, even though it was embarrassing, and even though it was like a huge shot to my ego, it was a great lesson, and that failure was an elite teacher in my life. And so again, how do we let failure be an elite teacher in our lives? Number one, we take ownership, complete responsibility of what we need to own on our part. And number two, we separate our failures from our actual identity. Hey, so if this has been helpful to you, or if you know somebody that this might be a benefit to, maybe you know somebody that just tends to be their own worst enemy and they keep beating themselves up because of mistakes they made last week or last year or 10 years ago, hey, please share this episode with them because I want to make sure that it's a value to them and an encouragement to them as well. As we head out here today, let me just challenge you. Go choose the better story. Learn from every failure because the most successful people in the world fail their way to the top, and you can do that this week. Let's go.
A better life, better vision, what you wanting? Let's make it happen. Time to choose the better story. Come on. Choose the better story. Choose the better story. Yeah.